Here's part 2 of my spotlight interview with Animator director David Block. Fasten your seatbelt because he's going to take you on an interesting ride through animation history and great stories from the 70s.
So what happened was I was working for Abe Levitow Studios. Abe Levitow, like I said earlier, was a protege of Chuck Jones. He now had his own studio, primarily producing commercials for General Mills and doing spots for Sesame Street. And by recommendation of Chuck and some of his people that I worked under at Chuck's, I was recommended to be an in-betweener for Abe. And Abe Levitow was occupying the second floor of the Walter Lantz Studios where all the Woody Woodpecker cartoons had been made. So there was unbelievable history in that building. And I was really into history. I mean, I loved history anyway. But, you know, I had already met Tex Avery and Bob Clampett, and I had worked for Chuck Jones, and now I'm working for Abe Levitow in Walter Lantz's original studio. It was so great. I worked for Abe for almost a full year, and Abe was scheduled to sort of take a break from his own studio and be a sequence director for Richard Williams on a film called Raggedy Ann and Andy. Yeah, he was going to be a sequence director, but Abe got cancer and died before the project could begin. In the ensuing months, I was asked if I wanted to be Art Babbitt's assistant on Raggedy Ann and Andy. Now, Art Babbitt, for the uninformed, was a very famous Disney animator who had animated Geppetto. He had done Geppetto in Pinocchio. He had animated the Mushroom Dance in Fantasia. He had actually developed Goofy as a singular character. So he was very famous. And I remember having lunch with Ben, because even though I wasn't taking Ben's class anymore, I was still very close to Ben Washam, and we would have lunch every week. And I remember asking him, I said, it's Art Babbitt. You know, the Art Babbitt. Art, you know, could have any assistant he wanted. Why are they asking me? And Ben said, because no one else would take it. And I found that out to be so. Art Babbitt was a very difficult person to work for. It's true he had taught a lot of classes at Richard Williams' studio, and he had taught classes at the Union Hall, which I had actually taken some of those classes. But what I discovered most about Art, having now worked in the industry for all of about a year, was whereas Ben, he would expose you to the most fun you could have. All of Ben's assignments, everything about Ben made animation fun. It was such that you would say, they're going to pay me to do this? You know, I'm actually getting paid to do this? That's how much fun it was. Babbitt could suck the fun out of everything, and did. But I went to work for him, and you know, there were nothing but great animators on the Raggedy Ann project. He had Hal Ambro, Jerry Chinicki, who was a famous Warner Brothers animator, John Kimball, that's Ward Kimball's son. He had Emery Hawkins, a very, very talented and famous Warner Brothers / MGM animator. Tisa David was a very well-respected New York animator who had been Grim Natwick's protege. Even Grim Natwick was working on this film, and Richard Williams was animating on this film. And Art Babbitt was animating on this film. And so under Art, I had already become an assistant animator at Abe Levitow. I had graduated from an in-betweener to an assistant. So I was Art Babbitt's assistant, and we did this I think the song was somewhere around 5.5 minutes long, where the camel with the wrinkled knees is introduced in the film and he sings his song. And I did the whole song as Art Babbitt's assistant. And I discovered, Art was not a young man at this point in time. He was a very old and bitter man. And the designs for the show, for the movie, were done by a brilliant guy named Corny Cole. My God, could he draw. Corny had done this wonderful design for the camel, and Art couldn't draw it. But because he was Art Babbitt, the Art Babbitt, he modified it tremendously to a place where he was comfortable drawing it. And if you look at the movie, there's Art's camel and there's everybody else's camel. And if you look closely, it's pretty obvious. So we did this song together, and it wasn't very much fun for me. We were all working in our homes. There was no studio. So once a week, I would meet Art up at his house, get my new scene, talk it over a little bit, and go home and do the assistant work. And I fully expected, because Art Babbitt was this iconic teacher of animation, he had this reputation, that I was going to learn a lot. Nothing. Never sat down, showed me anything. It was all just business. Here's my scene, go away, come back with it. Well, after a period of time, I wasn't learning anything, and I was getting frustrated. And I would go out to Corny Cole's house, and sort of vent. And Corny would go, I'll give you a scene. Well, Corny had to at least clear that with the production manager. So he mentioned that to the production manager. The production manager went back and told Art. And Art said, under no circumstances do you give Dave Block, any scenes to animate. He's an assistant, and he's got to learn his place on this film. Boy, did that not sit well with me. And so I started picking up other scenes from other animators to do the assistant work. And in a very short amount of time, I rediscovered how much fun it was even to be an assistant. I was continuing to see Ben Washam on this, for lunches, and I would tell him about all this, and he said, well, why don't you just leave? He said, Chuck is getting a project up. It's called Carnival of the Animals. It's with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Would you like to work under me? I'll teach you to animate. You'll be a junior animator, and you'll work under me, and we'll go work on Bugs and Daffy. So I quit on Art Babbitt. I said, I've had it. I'm leaving. And I should mention that one of the animators that I started picking up on the side from to do his assistant work was a really nice man named Spencer Peel. And Spencer was in charge, if you've ever seen Raggedy Ann and Andy, which a lot of people haven't seen, but there's this whole section at the very beginning of the movie with Marcella. She's the live action little girl who owns all the dolls, including Raggedy Ann and Andy. And she has this whole playroom full of dolls that come to life. And Spencer was in charge of doing all these dolls. And he was very supportive and appreciative of my assistant work. So when I quit, I not only quit on Art Babbitt, but I quit on Spencer. And I went off with Ben. And we started working on Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Now, I'll tell you one funny story. So, this is, other than this one thing that I had animated for Abe Levito on a Sesame Street, which, by the way, appears in a movie. There was a movie that came out in 2016 called Learning How to Drive. And it's with Sir Ben Kingsley, the Gandhi guy, Gandhi actor. And they made a little independent film. And one night I was at the Motion Picture Academy for voting, and a friend came up and said, did you get the screener for learning how to drive? And I went, yeah. Have you seen it? I said, no, I put it up on the shelf. I'll get around to it. He said, go home tonight and look at it. I went, what's going on? He said, when you get to 55 minutes, pay attention. So I did. And in this movie, 2016 feature with Ben Kingsley, the very first thing I ever animated was for Sesame Street. And it appears in this movie. I mean, I animated this thing for Sesame Street in 1974. It's in this movie. Anyway, so I went to work with Ben. We're animating Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. But I was very nervous. And this Sesame Street thing that I did in '74 was really the only other piece of commercial animation professionally that I had done prior to this. And now it's 1976. And so we start working on it, and Ben is tutoring me, but I'm really nervous. And he says, your animation's really tight, and you got to loosen up. So he said, this is what I want you to do. Do you have a bar near you, near your apartment? I said, yes. He says, I want you to go to the bar. And it's the middle of the day, and I want you to have a couple of drinks. And then I want you to go back and animate. So, I mean, I am not a drinker. But sure enough, I took his advice. I went down to the bar, I ordered scotch, and I had a couple of drinks. And then I went back to my animation desk in my apartment, and I started animating. And it's just flowing out of my pencil. It's just like, oh my God, I'm just animating like there's no tomorrow. It's just coming out, and it's just flowing and flowing and flowing. And after several hours, I sort of passed out. When I woke up, I looked at what I'd done, made absolutely no sense whatsoever. It was a complete fiasco. Eventually, I got the hang of it working for Ben and working for Chuck, because Chuck is very specific. His direction, there's not a lot of freedom in it. He wants something a certain way, and if you've worked for Chuck for years, you know exactly what that certain way is, and if you're new to it, it can be difficult. So I worked on that for a while, and then Ben got ill, very ill. And it would eventually lead to his passing away. And it got so bad that, Ben said, I can't keep going. I'm going to have to, remove myself from the production. And if I remove myself, they're not going to keep you on. And that made perfect sense. So the day I had to leave Chuck, Spencer Peele got word of it and said, you get Dave Block back. So what was really cool was I had Spencer asking for me, and he wanted me so bad that I got to ask for a raise. So I came back with a better situation working for Spencer. Art Babbitt was out of the picture as far as I was concerned, and I got paid more, and my status on the production kind of went up. And so I finished out I finished out with production on Raggedy Ann and Andy. Went to New York to work there on the sort of the crunch of finishing the movie, and ended up sort of being the key assistant on all those playroom characters, and actually got a chance to do some animation revisions on the movie. It all worked out great. And then immediately after that, I determined, well, I've worked for Chuck Jones, I've worked for Abe Levitow, worked for Richard Williams on a feature. Where's up from here? And of course, the answer was Disney. And in April of 1977, I managed to get into the Eric Larson animation program at Walt Disney Studios.